Hello, everyone. My name is Ian Murphy, and today we're going to go ahead and start on a brand new book, A History of Central Banking by Stephen Mitford Goodson. This is actually my first time reading it, so it should be interesting. Quote, "And you will never understand American history or the history of the Occident during the past 2,000 years unless you look at one or two problems, namely genies and usury. One or the other, or both. I should say both." End quote. Ezra Pound. Forward. This book is bound to be controversial and engender strong reactions. Why would a seemingly arid subject matter, such as the history of central banking and of the monetary system, give rise to such strong reactions? Goodson has the credentials and track record to make a credible presentation of a subject matter which he has researched for decades and which he has lived personally as a non-executive director of the South African Reserve Bank. I do not have the expertise to say whether Goodson's findings are accurate, but I do know that the raw nerves he touches are on account of central banking and the monetary system, created thereunder, being at the core of the persistent, profound, and inhumane differences in wealth distribution within any given country and among countries. For this reason, for several years, my party and I have argued that South Africa should reform its central banking and monetary system, even if that means placing our country out of step with iniquitous world standards. Books on economics and banking are generally viewed as being abstruse, whose readers are confined mainly to academia and business world. In this case, we have a notable exception. This work provides not only a broad sweep of the history of economics over almost 2 millennia, but insights into how the problems of usury have been confounding and enslaving mankind since its civilized existence first began. It may shock some to realize that the central banks throughout the world, including our own South African Reserve Bank, do not serve our own best interests, and are in fact in league with private banks. This not only undermines our sovereignty, but deprives us of the means of having publicly issued debt-free money, which belongs to the people as its sovereign debt, and interest-free means of exchange. Instead, in our country, as in other countries, we use private money produced out of debt by the private banking system. Shifting from banknotes to government notes would provide our people with a decent life, which is blessed, prosperous, and sustainable. But such a simple reform would be a real revolution, more difficult to bring about than any other reform or social change imaginable. Although South Africa gained its freedom in 1994, in all its outward manifestations inwardly, with the exception of a small minority of black and white entrepreneurs, the general population has neither benefited nor thrived, and moreover has not realized its latent potential, mainly because of the defects in the monetary system. If we are to achieve real freedom, it is imperative that monetary reform be pursued with the same vigor and intensity as was displayed towards political reform during these struggling years. But that requires understanding the complex issues of how money is created, whom it belongs to, and whose interests it serves. In this book, Goodson has not only sketched numerous successes of previous states, rather than private banking systems, but has also provided us with a blueprint which may address many of our entrenched social problems, such as low economic growth, high unemployment, and declining services. Albeit decidedly controversial, this is a book which thinking South Africans should read as an inspiration for political action. In his address before the American Newspaper Publishers Association on April 27, 1961, President John F. Kennedy famously stated, quote, "Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy." End quote. Prince Mangosuthu Buthenslanki MP, President of the Inkatha Freedom Party, Republic of South Africa. Introduction. Actually, hold on. Really just woke up an hour ago. All right. Introduction. History is the most crucial subject of any educational system, superseding science and the humanitarians in importance. Within its fabrics, it holds the culture, traditions, beliefs, ethos, and raison d'etre necessary for the continued existence of any people. If history is comprised by falsifications and omissions, which are frequently imposed by outsiders, then that civilization will decay and finally collapse, as may be observed in the slow disintegration of Western civilization since 1945. George Orwell expressed a similar sentiment in 1984 when he wrote, quote, "The most effective way to destroy people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of history." End quote. Winston Churchill once made the observation that the further one goes back into history, the clearer the picture becomes. By employing this technique, the author is hopeful that any doubts which readers may have concerning his analysis and exegesis of modern historical events will be assuaged, if not entirely eliminated. For any nation, state, society, community to have full sovereignty and independence in its affairs, absolute control over the means it employs to exchange goods and services must reside with the organs which represent the people and must not be delegated to private individuals. Throughout recorded history, periods of state control of the money supply have been synonymous with eras of prosperity, peace, cultural enrichment, full employment, and zero inflation. However, when private bankers usurp control of the money creation process, the inevitable results are recurring cycles of prosperity and poverty, unemployment, embedded inflation, and an enormous and ever-increasing transfer of wealth and political power to this tiny clique, who control this exploitive monetary system. Whenever these private and central bankers have been opposed in the past by nations seeking restoration of an honest money system, these parasitic bankers have invariably invoked a patriotic war in order to defeat the much maligned enemy. This has been a feature of almost all wars during the past 300 plus years. This book provides insights as to how private bankers since ancient times have abused monetary systems, whether they are based on coin, banknotes, check, or electronic money, by creating money out of nothing as an interest-bearing debt in order to arrogate supreme power to themselves. It also provides a record, both ancient and modern, of societies and civilizations which have flourished in an environment free from the burden of usury. The solution is simple and self-evident. If we wish to obtain our liberation and sovereignty from the enslavement imposed by the private bankers, we must dismantle their fractional reserve system of banking and supporting central banks, or we ourselves shall be destroyed and consigned to oblivion. Stephen Mitford Goodson. Chapter 1. How Usury Destroyed the Roman Empire. Quote, "Money being naturally barren, to make it breed money is preposterous and a perversion from the end of its institution, which has only to serve the purpose of exchange and not of increase. Men called bankers we shall hate, for they enrich themselves while doing nothing." End quote. Aristotle, Politics. The monetary system of the Roman era, 753 BC through 565 AD, may be divided into three distinct periods, where units of three different metals were used as the means of exchanging goods and services. Although there is evidence of modern human occupation, Homo sapiens sapiens in the Rome area going back 14,000 years, with Neanderthals having lived there approximately 140,000 years ago. Rome, as a city, is traditionally said to have been founded by Romulus and Remus in 753 BC, in a region surrounding the Palatine Hills, also known as Latium. According to the legend, Romulus, who killed his brother Remus, became its first king, but later shared the throne with Titus Tatius, the ruler of the Sabians. Around 600 BC, Latium came under the control of the Etruscans. Oh my gosh. Etruscans. There we go. Sorry. This lasted until the last king, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled in 509 BC, and the Roman Republic was established. The Etruscans, a people of Aryan origin, created one of the most advanced civilizations of that period and built roads, temples, and numerous public buildings in Rome. The first money used in Rome was the cow. This was not true money, but a barter system. Many early peoples used cattle as a medium of exchange. According to the legend of Heracles and the Augean stables, the cattle kept there, over 3,000 in number, represented the treasury of King Augus. The Copper Age, 753 through 267 BC. As time went on, the Romans took to using, instead of cattle, irregular lumps of copper or bronze. These lumps were called aes rude, or rough metal, and had to be weighed for each transaction. There was an increase in trade, and Rome became one of the most prosperous cities in the ancient world. This prosperity was based on uncoined copper, later bronze, metal which was measured by weight, according to a fixed system of units. It was issued by the Roman treasury in the forms of ingots weighing 3.5 pounds, with the full backing of the state, and was known as aes sigatum, stamped metal, because it was stamped by the government with a cow, eagle, or elephant or other image. Sometimes they were made to resemble a scallop shell. In 289 BC, these ingots were replaced by discoidal, cast-leaded bronze coins, aeas grave, heavy metal. They represented national money and, quotes, were paid into circulation by the state and only of value inasmuch as the symbols on which its numbers were recorded were scarce or otherwise, end quote. This money was thus based on law rather than the metallic content, although that content was standardized and the coin did have some intrinsic value, unlike most coins today. This can be considered as an early example of the successful use of fiat money. While fiat money is much criticized in some quarters, for example by the followers of Austrian economic Ludwig von Mises, there is nothing wrong with it, as long as it is issued by government, not by private bankers, and is carefully protected against counterfeiters. Non-fiat money, in contrast, has the serious drawback that whoever sets the price of gold and silver, i.e., private bankers, can control the nation's economy. Up to 300 BC, there was an unsurpassed increase in public and private wealth of the Romans. This may be measured in the gain in land. After the conclusion of the Second Latin War in 338 BC and the defeat of the Etruscans, the Roman Republic increased in the size from 2,135 square miles to 10,350 square miles, or 20% of the peninsular Italy. In tandem with the expansion of its land area, the population rose from about 750,000 to 1 million, with 150,000 persons living in Rome itself. A partnership was formed between the Senate and the people known as the Senatus Populusque Romanus, or SPQR, the Senate and people of Rome. The political leaders were renowned for their frugality and honest virtue. The means of exchange was strictly regulated in accordance with the increase in population and trade, and there was zero inflation. Debt bondage nexum, whereby a free man offered his services and security for a loan, plus interest, and where in case of non-payment the debt had to be worked off, was abolished after plebeian agitation by the Lex Potelia in 326 BC. The Silver Age, 267 through 27 BC. The traditional monetary system was destroyed in 267 BC when the patrician elite obtained the privilege to mint silver coinage. This change was typified by a patrician who went to the temple of Juno Moneta, from whence the word money is derived, and converted a sackful of silver, denarii, to 5 times its original value by the simple expedient of stamping a new value on the coins. He thus pocketed a very substantial difference in seigniorage for his own private account. The early Roman silver coin was known as the drachma and was modeled on a coin used in the Greek south of the peninsula. It was later replaced with the smaller and lighter denarius. There was also a half denarius called the quinarius and a quarter unit called the sestertius. Still later, the system was supplemented with the victoriatus, somewhat lighter than the denarius, and probably intended to facilitate trade with Rome's Greek neighbors. There were very few deposits of silver in the Italian peninsula, and as a consequence, the Roman army had to be expanded in order to conquer territories to obtain supplies. The Roman peasants who had provided the Republic with food independence were drafted in increasing numbers into the army. Agricultural production, especially corn, declined, and the peasant farms were replaced by latifundia, which were large estates worked by slaves. Wheat also had to be imported from North Africa. Tensions about granting citizenship and enfranchisement between Rome and her Italic allies resulted in the Social War, 90 through 89 BC. This lack of enfranchisement had led to the fragmentation of the Roman society and the alienation of the working class citizens, who were treated as chattel and who had no responsibilities and therefore no commitment toward the state. Until as late as the Second Punic War, 218 through 201 BC, they were not allowed to serve in the army. This is a classic example of a society which had been monetarized. The Republic was weakened and there was increasing despotism. Piracy became a major problem, with raids taking place on the coast, villas being sacked, and travelers kidnapped. Violence became endemic and gangsters and terrorists were active in Rome. As there was no police force to maintain law and order, these are inevitable consequences of a society in which money has become the highest ethos. There was political intrigue amongst the elite and economic deprivation amongst the poor. And with large populations of slaves from North Africa, it all contributed to the social unrest. This turmoil culminated in the revolt led by Spartacus in 73 through 71 BC. The first and second revolts were in 135 through 132 BC, and in 104 through 100 BC. Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar, from 100 through 44 BC, was born into an aristocratic family on July 12, 100 BC. He was tall and fair-headed and practiced briefly as a lawyer before becoming a brilliant military commander who conquered Gaul, France, in 59 through 52 BC. After his defeat of Pompey the Great in 48 BC, as Pharsalus, Caesar became the undisputed leader of the Roman Republic. On his return to Italy in September 45 BC, Caesar found the streets and cities crowded with homeless people who were forced off the land by usurers and land monopolists. 300,000 people had to be fed daily at the public granary. Usury was flourishing with disastrous consequences. The principal usurers were charging interest rates as high as 48% per annum. As Lucius Annius Seneca, 4 BC through 65 AD, the philosopher would remark in De Superstition, quote, "The customs of that most criminal nation have gained such strength that they have now been received in all lands. The conquered have given laws to the conqueror. End quote. At the time, there were two main political parties. The optimates, centered around the nobility, the Senate, and the privileged few, and the populares, who represented the citizens. Caesar immediately assumed leadership of the latter. Caesar fully understood the evils of usury and how to counter them. Quote, he recognized the profound truth that money is a national agent created by law for a national purpose, and that no classes of men should withhold it from circulation so as to cause panics, or in order that speculators could advance the rates of interest, or could buy up property at ruinous prices after such panic. End quote. Caesar introduced the following social reforms. 1. Restoration of property was done at the much lower valuations which held prior to the Civil War from 49 through 45 BC. 2. Several remissions of rents were granted. 3. Large numbers of poor citizens and discharged veterans were settled on allotments. 4. Free housing was provided to 80,000 impoverished families. 5. Soldiers' pay was increased from 123 to 225 denarii. 6. The corn dole was regulated. 7. Provincial communities were enfranchised. 8. Confusion in the calendar was removed by fixing it at 365 and a quarter days from January 1st, 44 BC. His monetary reforms were as follows. 1. State debt levels were immediately reduced by 25%. 2. Control of the mint was transferred from the patricians, usurers, to government. 3. Cheap metal coins were issued as the means of exchange. 4. It was ruled that interest could not be levied at more than 1% per month. 5. It was decreed that interest could not be charged on interest, and that the total interest charged could never exceed the capital loaned in duplum rule. 6. Slavery was abolished as a means of settling debt. 7. Aristocrats were forced to employ their capital and not hoard it. These measures enraged the aristocrats and plutocrats, whose livelihood was now severely restricted. They therefore conspired to murder Caesar, the hero of the people. On that fateful morning, on March 15th, 44 BC, only 4 years after assuming power, he arrived at the Senate building unarmed, having dismissed his military guard, who had previously been in constant attendance. Surrounded by 60 conspirators, he was stabbed to death and received 23 wounds. The Golden Age, 27 BC through 476 AD. In 27 BC, shortly after Caesar's death and his deification, the Romans adopted the Golden Standard, which would have far-reaching implications for the financial stability of the empire and led directly to its demise. Previously, during the days of the Roman Republic, gold coins were issued only in times of great need, such as during the Second Punic War or the campaign of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. There were few gold mines in Europe, except in remote places like Wales, Transylvania, and Spain, and therefore most of the supplies could only be secured from the east. This in turn required a large and expensive army, which became engaged in constant conflict at the empire's fringes. The gold coin was known as an aureus. Also in circulation were the silver denarius and various copper coins, the sestertius, dupontius, and the as. The scarcity of gold or commodity money frequently induced periods of deflation as a result of the lack of a circulating means of exchange. In 13 BC, a measure of relief was provided when the weight of the gold aureus was reduced from 122 to 72 grains, and this remained the standard weight until 310 AD. However, metals continued to flow eastward in order to pay for luxury items, religious dues, and usury payments. Furthermore, wear and tear resulted in the loss of 1/3 of total coinage in circulation over a 100-year period. As gold was treated as a commodity, its debasement was not tolerated. Emperor Constantine, 275 through 337 AD, personally ordered death for counterfeiting and the burning of public minters who committed falsification. Money changers who did not report a counterfeit gold bezant, solidus, were immediately flogged and enslaved and exiled. These regulations were effective for the bezant, which weighed 70 grains and was slightly more than the bezant that was still circulating in 1025 AD and weighed 68 grains. In 313 AD, Christianity was tolerated by the Edict of Milan, and from 388 AD was established as the official religion by Emperor Theodos I from 347 through 395 AD. From this time, monetary power resided in the religious authority of the Pontifex Maximus. A feature of the imperial era was social injustice and the undermining of the middle classes through excessive taxation. The Roman businessman was not a trader, but a looter of the provinces, as the homeland had a weak industrial production base, which was incapable of providing the required manufactured goods. As the monetarization of society continued, with the rich parasiting of the common man, the plebeian became more like slaves. The abolition of the jury system was symptomatic of the decline in respect and importance of the common man in Roman society. Role of the Church in the decline and fall. The text that Emperor Constantine decreed, viz., that 1/10 of all income had to be tithed to the Christian Church, hastened the destruction of the empire. Eventually, the Church held 1/3 to 1/2 of all lands and accumulated wealth. This concentration of wealth produced a great scarcity of coinage. Money existed, but there was no circulation or distribution of goods and services. Instead of recycling the tithed money by means of investment in the community or charitable works such as construction of hospitals, schools, and libraries, vast hoards of gold were concentrated behind the 20-foot thick walls of the fortress city of Constantinople and the Vatican fortress in Rome. In its last years, in the 5th and 6th centuries, the Roman Empire had become a parasitic organism, subject to alternating phases of inflation and deflation. Its economic ruination preceded its political ruination. There was no industrial production. Almost all food had to be imported, and usury was practiced on an unprecedented scale. The wealth of the empire that was not held by the church was controlled by 2,000 Roman families. The rest of the population lived in poverty. Consequences. The implosion of the western half of the empire in 476 AD, after repeated military incursions by the Goths and Vandals, resulted in the Dark Ages. A punishing multi-century deflationary depression followed. According to the United States Silver Commission of 1876, the metallic money of the Roman Empire at its height amounted to $1.8 billion, but by the end of the Dark Ages, it had shrunk to 200 million. Agriculture was reduced to subsistence level. Large sailing vessels vanished as there was no trade. Commerce stagnated, arts and science were lost, and the knowledge of cement making disappeared. Major factors in the decline of the Roman Empire were the concentration of wealth, the absence of mining deposits for industrial production, and the vast importation of slaves by the 4th century AD. As a result of the continuing decline in the Roman female fertility, slaves outnumbered citizens by 5 to 1. The most important economic reason was an inadequate supply of an inexpensive circulating medium of money, and the false notion that money should be a commodity. Thus, from an economic perspective, the lessons from the fall of Rome are are that a dishonest economic system will inevitably contribute to the forces of dissolution. No society can survive a false economic system. For any society to function and prosper, it is absolutely fundamental that the means of exchange be issued free of debt and interest by the legal authority of the state as representatives of the people in perpetuity. That's the end of chapter 1. I will see you guys all in the next video. Thank you.